Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Nonprofit Maintenance with Otzi. I'm thrilled this morning to have two incredible guests with me. The first one I think we all know now and love is Julianne Buck. Julie is the director of the Community Foundation of Grundy County. She's also a teacher at Joliet Junior College in nonprofit organizational development and everything that you really need. She also is the president and CEO of Nonprofit Brains and Brawn, which is her own nonprofit company. And she's a colleague of mine. We bounce things off each other. She tells me when I need to stop. And when I'm doing it wrong. And I am very lucky to have that in my corner. Also, I want to introduce to you a gentleman, a lawyer from Chicago, Illinois, Marc Lane. Marc, good morning.
Good morning, Sally. Pleasure to be with you and great to see Julie.
Thank you so much. I mean, I was telling Marc, I said, just to explain who Marc is takes 3 pages. That's who this gentleman is. So
I'm pretty easy to explain, actually, but
you are not easy
I'll
to
take that as
explain,
a
my friend.
compliment. Thank you.
You are a nationally recognized business and tax attorney, a mastered registered financial planner, a registered financial counselor, a certified investment specialist. You're twice a recipient of the Illinois State Bar Association's Lincoln Award. You've taught law at Northwestern University of Law and Business in the MBA program at the University of Illinois. And on and on and on. Now, this morning, you've written 36 books as well. I mean, you know that. I'm not telling you. I'm telling you something. Did you know you wrote 36 books?
I wasn't sure, but I'm glad you clarified that for me. Thank you.
And they're all amazing. Profitable, socially responsible investing, an institutional investor's guide, uh, legal handbook for nonprofit organizations. Yeah, I mean, and on and on. To tap you today and to give us some of your valuable time, Marc, because you have this entire law office group. The website is incredibly impressive with all the areas and fields that your law office covers. And I will post a link to that as well so that you can go in yourself and see. But something came up to me several months ago, and I reached out to Julie and I said, "What in the heck is an L3C nonprofit?" And she said, "Don't talk to me, talk to Marc Lane." And I went, "Okay, who's Marc Lane?" And then she introduced me to you, and we had the most wonderful conversation on the phone, Marc, where you still left me not really understanding it. But that's okay because you're the expert in this. And not only are you the expert in this, you wrote the legislation around an L3C. So, what I'd like to do, and I know Julie's going to have questions, is I'd like to sit back and have you tell us about what an L3C is, who can do it, why do you do it, and we'll just go from there. Marc, the audience is waiting to hear from you.
All right. Well, thank you. You're very kind and you're very generous. An L3C, or low profit limited liability company, is a specialized form of a limited liability company, LLC, which is the most popular business form for closely held companies in the United States. So everything I'm going to tell you about the L3C applies first to all LLCs, and then there's an overlay for social purpose ventures or social enterprises. But initially, we're talking about an entity that creates a liability shield. So when you have any LLC, the owner is going to be protected from the debts of the enterprise. That's the first thing. Second, there is flexibility in terms of taxes. You have the ability for the entity to be taxed on its income as a corporation would, or it can be a disregarded entity where its income or loss flows through to the returns of its shareholders. So what that allows you to do is in the early stages of the business, you can take losses, including artificial accounting losses, and apply them against income earned from other sources on your personal return. And once the venture becomes profitable in its own right, you'd prefer to have the entity pay its own taxes. And then the third thing that an LLC offers you is flexibility in governance. It can either be manager managed, which is akin to having a board of directors, which might just be one person that's the manager of the enterprise, or it can be member managed, which is a participatory democracy where the owners all have voting rights in terms of its operation. Now, what I've just described applies to all LLCs, including the L3C. What's different about the L3C is it is constrained by statute to be significantly pursuing a charitable or educational purpose. So this is, in many cases, the perfect entity for a nonprofit organization that is looking at its core competencies and underutilized assets and creating a business so it can create earned revenue, diversifying its sources of revenue, being less dependent upon government contracts, government grants, and philanthropy, all of which are increasingly unreliable. So it's really a strategy for self-reliance and sustainability over the long term. So about half of the L3Cs in the US are attached to a nonprofit organization, often as a subsidiary, and the other half are freestanding for-profit social purpose businesses. So let me go on to tell you why you would use an L3C. There are three different advantages of the L3C when a nonprofit seeks to become entrepreneurially, creating a business to drive mission, but also become self-reliant in terms of its funding. The first is capital formation. The L3C tracks point by point all of the requirements that the Internal Revenue Service imposes upon private foundations in exchange for the tax benefits they enjoy. Foundations, of course, are able to tell their donors that the contributions they make to the foundation are going to be tax deductible. But the foundation's income is also going to be tax exempt. So those tax benefits are bestowed upon foundations because they in turn are obliged to distribute at least 5% of their assets annually for charitable or similar purposes, typically in the form of grants. This is what accounts for the feverish competition among operating charities seeking grants from foundations. So the L3C is eligible for grants, non-dilutive capital funding. It is also eligible for a specialized form of investment, which is also available to foundations, and that is either an equity investment or a debt investment that is going to be returning less than risk-adjusted market rate returns, but will qualify just the same as a grant would in meeting the 5% distribution requirement. Now, from the foundation's perspective, the program-related investments continues as an asset on the foundation's balance sheet because one day the debt will mature, principal will come back, presumably interest will have been paid along the way. And if it's an equity investment, there will one day be a liquidity event. The business will be sold, or there will be some other contractual opportunity for the foundation to excuse itself from the foundation and get paid back, presumably with profits. So unlike a grant where the money is gone for all times, there's no return of capital, let alone return on capital, an L3C affords the foundation the ability to make a so-called program-related investment, which has a multiplier effect financially because that money, as it comes back, can be recycled over and over again in perpetuity. And similarly, it has a social multiplier effect because as that money continues to be put out in the market over and over again, it's going to be driving positive social change with those grants or those investments that succeed the original investments in the L3C. So the L3C, let's imagine for a moment it's a subsidiary of a nonprofit. First of all, we've now created a for-profit entity where the nonprofit has the ability to sell equity. Nonprofits have no equity to sell. They're not owned by anybody. But by establishing an L3C, all of a sudden we can lay off entrepreneurial risk on third parties. We can also enter into equity-owned strategic alliances with other nonprofits or governments or academia or for-profit business, so long as the nonprofit maintains control, both operational control and a majority of equity, which is great because it takes those issues off the table when it comes time to negotiate. In addition, so that's kind of the capital formation angle. By virtue of the foundation's investment in an L3C, it de-risks the investment for other investors who come in concurrently or subsequently. It may be other investments, other foundations who join them, who respect their investment decisions, or it may be this emerging category of impact investors, socially conscious individuals, impact funds, and others who now join in by virtue of the fact that the foundation has done the heavy lifting. It's done the due diligence. It's found the mission to be appropriate. There has been proof of concept. They like management. Their cause is aligned with the mission of the foundation and so on. Now, all of a sudden, you've opened up a universe of investors beyond the foundation by virtue of the fact that the foundation has been catalytic in its investment. In fact, the foundation may serve essentially as a social venture capitalist, bringing in not only money, but expertise, infrastructure, relationships, and so on. All good for the nonprofit that's creating a business and needs help in doing so. So that's kind of the capital formation angle. I should tell you, too, that the L3C, as a subsidiary of the nonprofit, when opening up a business that furthers the exempt purpose of the nonprofit parent, the profits of the subsidiary L3C are themselves tax exempt. So we could take the very same business in the rest of the world. If somebody opened up a business, they would obviously have to pay tax on their income. Here, by virtue of placing it under a nonprofit and furthering the exempt purpose of the nonprofit, those income becomes tax exempt. So which means that gross becomes net. When raising investment capital, the cost of capital is reduced. The return on investment is increased. You got no taxes to worry about. Further, once earnings are generated within the L3C, they can either be upstream to the parent to be deployed programmatically, or they can be used to reinvest in the growth of the subsidiary to achieve scale of the L3C. The L3C now as a social enterprise presents other opportunities for scale and rollout through strategic alliance with other organizations in other geographies, for example. You can have social enterprise franchises created out of an L3C. So it has all of the business opportunities outside the nonprofit world all become available because now you're tapping into investment capital and you're operating in the for-profit world. Culturally now, you not only have your nonprofit hat, you have a for-profit hat. So depending upon whom you're talking to, what language they're expecting, what metrics you are measuring performance against, you're talking the same language, whether you're talking to other nonprofits with whom you wish to collaborate, or if you're talking to businesses with whom you wish to collaborate. You might sell goods or services to businesses that are now expanding what corporate social responsibility means to them to tap in to the entrepreneurial capacities of nonprofits, which increasingly are becoming entrepreneurial in their own right. So that's kind of the capital formation angle. There's also a governance angle here with the L3C. Since the L3C by law must significantly pursue a charitable or educational purpose, there's no daylight between the objectives of the nonprofit through its exempt purposes as declared to the IRS and the objectives of the for-profit. So we're not, and nobody's going to draw an inference that, hey, why aren't you sticking to your knitting? Why aren't you pursuing your exempt purpose? We are. This is merely an instrumentality by which we're accomplishing it and doing it better and smarter and being a better steward of the resources entrusted to us. Of course, we're deploying money for the purpose of becoming more and more self-sufficient and not having to go back to the well as often or for as much money. Donors actually appreciate that. Sometimes people think when a nonprofit sets up a social enterprise, donors aren't going to have to, they're going to back away. Well, you don't need us anymore, or you're in the commercial world now. Well, that's just not true. Donors actually appreciate this because comparing this nonprofit versus another nonprofit that is relying exclusively on philanthropy, for example, you're more enlightened. You're taking your assets and resources and making them work harder. You're flexing that muscle in new and different ways. You're achieving missions in a smarter fashion. This is really a vote of confidence in management and leadership of the nonprofit. So there are governance attributes that are really attractive here that you wouldn't have in a standard LLC, which by statute are just plain old commercial vehicles. Here, these are social enterprises by law. So you have a statutory ordering of fiduciary priorities here that otherwise would not exist. And that's key. There are some foundations that will only invest in L3Cs because of that governance attribute. And then you have a branding, positioning, signaling advantage as a nonprofit. Every L3C has L3C in its name. So people, as they know about it and they're more sophisticated and get to know about it, will say, wait, I want to favor you because number one, you're looking at ways to diversify your sources of funding, becoming stronger, finding ways where your capital can be worked harder, where you can create strategic alliances both for funding and activities and operations and impact. And you end up with a collective impact situation, which is, exceedingly powerful. So I think I've done enough in terms of this introduction, probably more than you bargained for.
No, Julie and I are like, teach us, oh master. I mean, we're trying to learn this whole new development, because when you're hyper focused on C3, C6, and all of a sudden, an L3C comes in, we're like, what? So what types of businesses would benefit the most from this, Mark? I mean, like I'm an LLC. What type of business would benefit the most
Okay,
in
so if you're
creating
now,
this?
if I'm taking it out of the nonprofit realm and I'm in the for-profit world, okay, the requirements are generally these. You must be significantly pursuing an educational or charitable mission, as you are in your consulting. You are also going to be denied the right to, just as nonprofits are, to support or oppose political candidates or parties. Reason for that is the very same reason that applies to C3s. That is, you shouldn't be using public money, which is what this is going to attract, to give a competitive advantage to one party or another, or a candidate or another. The thing that people sometimes misunderstand from the name L3C. Now, I wrote the law, but I didn't name it. And low profit's a little misleading because there is no limitation on profit prospectively or retrospectively. In fact, many of these are making a lot of money. The reason for the low profit name, just to clarify that, is that it's intended to fill a gap in the funding ecosystem. If you have a business or nonprofit that has a significant opportunity for positive social change, but may not necessarily make enough money to attract a venture capitalist, this is intended to fill that gap where foundations are now invited to create that funding and in furtherance of their own mission and their own statutory obligations. So the low profit thing has to do with the expectation that many of them are just not likely to generate a 10x return that's going to be appealing to a venture capitalist. I must tell you, however, some do, and that's totally fine. It's just that's where the name came from. It's expected that this is going to be a low profit situation, but with high prospects for social impact. And that's where the name came from. But there's nothing that prohibits any nonprofit from creating one of these that will be exceptionally profitable, nor a social entrepreneur was the other category, either converting an existing LLC to an L3C, gaining these advantages, or starting a new L3C in lieu of an LLC. Or the other thing you can do is convert a corporation into an L3C. There are simplified methods under corporate statutes to do that in those states that permit L3Cs. Now, not every state has an authorizing law allowing L3Cs. However, every state has L3Cs. I know that because we represent them in every state. Just the same as you could have a Delaware corporation operating in Illinois, you organize it in a state that allows it, and then register it as a foreign entity in the state in which you operate, or the states in which you operate. Many L3Cs operate in many states. So you can have an L3C wherever you may be, either as a social entrepreneur in a for-profit basis, or as a nonprofit seeking to create an earned revenue stream. And many times we'll have clients or prospective clients come in with the germ of an idea, and they want to know, should I go nonprofit? Should I go for-profit? Not always an easy calculus. And sometimes we'll conclude, let's do both. Let's create a nonprofit and create an L3C subsidiary at the same time. In the nonprofit, we'll put soft cost activities like research and development, outreach, education, publishing, and in the subsidiary, we'll put the more capital intensive activities. If you're going to have a store or a factory or workforce development initiative, and then what happens is you can seamlessly move money back and forth between the two and receive money in either one of them. In fact, while the nonprofit owns the L3C 100%, you can raise tax-deductible donations from individuals and corporations directly in the name of the L3C subsidiary or in the name of nonprofit. You can always take in tax-deductible donations and grants at the nonprofit level and then bring that money down to the subsidiary, either in the form of a capital contribution or a loan or a sharing of expenses. That's the other thing. There's no prohibition against sharing overhead between the nonprofit and its business, as long as it's reasonable and as long as the nonprofit doesn't get penalized in the exchange. If it's commercially fair value, you can share office, you can share technology, you can share personnel, and so on. It's just, I can't get into everything because there's so much nuance to it, but it's extremely opportune kind of a structure. There are now something north of 2,000 of them around the country. Roughly half are in the nonprofit sphere, and roughly half are in the for-profit sphere, standalone for-profit ventures. What else can I tell you?
So
This like
I'm always fearful of abuse. And I know this because I'm in some private Facebook groups, and every once in a while somebody comes on and says, "Ooh, I'm a for-profit company and I manufacture widgets. So I'm going to create a nonprofit and set it up so they can only buy their widgets from me. And then I don't have to go sell my widgets anywhere else because I've set up this nonprofit to buy my widgets." So who does the oversight on
Okay.
those types of relationships?
Well, in the first place, if that were accurately disclosed to the IRS, you wouldn't get your tax exemption. So you would have to have falsified your application, your 1023. As to the L3C, the Illinois law specifically provides that L3Cs are subject to the Charitable Trust Act. I did that on purpose. And that way, L3Cs are regulated the same as charities are in the state. I also, obviously, if it's a subsidiary of a nonprofit, the IRS gets a 990 every year, and I mean, it's just the same regulation process as any. In fact, the L3C's operations are reported on the nonprofit's 990, so you're not hiding anything.
right.
And if you falsify it, that's perjury because you're signing under the perils of perjury. But there are there are structures whereby much of that can be accomplished. So, for example, I wrote a law. I'm on the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation, which is a permanent agency of government. I wrote the law creating it, and it incubates actionable social policy recommendations for the Cook County Board, which includes the city of Chicago. And one of the laws that I created, which is unanimously passed by the Cook County Board, creates a procurement preference for social enterprises that wish to sell goods or services to Cook County, whether it be a nonprofit or whether it be an L3C, an L3C specifically named in the ordinance. And then I wrote the regulations creating that are promulgated under the ordinance. So in working with the chief procurement officer for the county, the question arose, well, what happens if a public company creates an L3C for the purpose of taking advantage of the procurement preference, so it can, which is kind of analogous to what you're talking about, Julie, and they want to take advantage of the procurement preference, which is a 5% improvement on their bid. So we went back and forth, and ultimately the conclusion was, let's suppose a public company sets up an L3C and it meets all the requirements of an L3C. And it legitimately, let's suppose, for example, it's a workforce development initiative. 80% of its employees are either marginalized populations, disabled people, other, protected classes. And it includes
Formally incarcerated. There's a lot of workforce around that.
And in doing that, they're creating a training program, and they're educating these people so they're learning how to deal with customers and deal with supervisors and get to work on time, learn the soft stuff as well as the hard skills, build a resume so they could actually go out into the world beyond that and get a job because they have real experience and real knowledge and so on. So the procurement officer said, and I agreed, well, if they're going through those steps, then the fact that a public company owns the social enterprise shouldn't make any difference than if I, as an individual, set up a social enterprise and the rest of my life I'm a miserable person, but as to the social enterprise I happen to own, I'm doing all the right things, and therefore I'm entitled to that preference. So the way the law reads, the way the regs read, yeah, they can do that. And because guess what? Were it not for their procurement preference, they would not have added that social value. So this now becomes an incentive for purely commercial players to enter the social impact ecosystem and make a difference, invest money, recruit people, empower disadvantaged populations in ways that otherwise they may never do because they never were incented to do it. So, I mean, there's a lot of nuance here, but there are ways. I mean, often we'll set up corporate foundations for businesses. We're doing right now a very large benefit corporation, a Delaware benefit corporation, that's going to have a corporate foundation. And they're going to be doing a lot of good stuff where their corporations kicking over money to the foundation for social good. There is a halo effect back to the corporation. It's going to be named the same, just like the Boeing Foundation is named after Boeing. They're the principal funders, but it's going to really expand its social impact. It's a benefit corporation. It's going to have social impact in the first place. It's going to be sustainable in the first place. But now all of a sudden we're using nonprofits. Now there's nothing to prevent the nonprofit from having an L3C subsidiary. There's nothing from having the benefit corporation have an L3C subsidiary. We may want to have an intellectual property holding company, which licenses rights to the operating entities. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to introduce greater levels of sophistication to the nonprofit community so they can do the stuff successfully that the business community has done for decades and do it in a way where they become more financially self-reliant, and therefore be able to do more social good because of it. They have the tools. They have the wheelhouse, which they haven't had before. I mean, it's really what this is about.
Well, I've got a local example. Boxing gym. has really grown in the, oh, why has it slipped my mind? Disease, brain deterioration, Parkinson's.
Parkinson's.
They've really grown in the Parkinson's realm,
Yeah.
and they're still a for-profit. And she wanted to know if she could set up a nonprofit to collect donations to fund the classes for their Parkinson's students and
They base
researched
this
it a
off
little
of,
bit.
did they base this whole thing because of Muhammad Ali and that? Is that where
Part of
the
it, sure, yeah, part of it.
I'm a
So
boxing fan, so I
actually, a lot of it more was the fact that her father
oh
has Parkinson's and has slowed the progression through boxing. So is this a situation where they might want to close the corporation, reopen it as an L3C?
Um, there's a lot more facts that I would need to know or help with,
Okay.
but that's conceivable. Or they might want to set up a corporate foundation, and there are ways in which the foundation can provide um, support for activities that themselves are charitable. There are different ways of doing it. We have a client I'll describe to you. I can talk about it fairly openly, given that usually I can't talk about clients because of confidentiality. This particular case, this client was just featured in Forbes. Um, happens to be an L3C. Um, it's a huge company founded by a brilliant biomedical engineer. And uh, they raised most of their money through crowdfunding. I
hmm,
mean, millions. They're based in California. And what they wanted to do was they understood they could get foundation funding through an L3C. We set up an L3C subsidiary to fund um, prosthetic devices for people that can't afford them. What this company does, it invented and manufactures prosthetic devices for veterans or people who've been in accidents and so on. What's different about there's a lot of prosthetic devices out there. What's different about this one, it's connected to the brain in such a fashion that the hand feels. So if you touch, felt or leather or whatever, it feels the same as you or I might feel it.
wow.
And it has touch sensitivity, and they're expanding it beyond that, but it's just fairly amazing.
Yeah.
So what we've done is created relationships with public charities where the public charities can receive tax deductible donations and then deploy that money back to this entity's L3C subsidiary to buy prosthetic devices.
Hmm.
Other ways that has to be done that are technically compliance, but it is being done. And that's a totally for-profit entity with an L3C sub. So there are a lot of different ways of playing the game.
Now, how about
Well,
reporting on this? I mean, do do the states understand what this is about, or the IRS get this yet?
Well, there are different angles to that question. The IRS understands that it's a for-profit corporation that has an LLC subsidiary. That's not too unusual.
Okay.
The IRS understands that it is an L3C that is reported as any LLC would, and it's registered with the Attorney General under the Charitable Trust Act. And there's certain contractual things. We also have to have, in my view, just best practices. I'll always have a contract between the prime business and the L3C, if it isn't the prime business, to ensure that the resources are shared appropriately where there's not private benefit or private inurement. So I mean, there are self-dealing or conflicts of interest. You build in all of the safeguards, and but yeah, I mean, it's out there, and I'm finding more and more creative ways to use these kinds of forms. And I do have another form that's pending now that I created It's not yet law. That will be. You might want to have another conversation about that when it happens. It's an Illinois law, but it passed the Illinois House unanimously. It's now in the Illinois Senate. I believe it will have a similar outcome there. Creates a new form of trust that I've called the virtuous trust. And it's under Illinois law, you can't have a trust last indefinitely unless you have ascertainable beneficiaries. It's a throwback to old English common law where there's a prohibition against the so-called rule against perpetuities. So you could have, for example, in estate planning or business succession planning, you could identify named people and their heirs because it's by reference to somebody you've identified. But if I wanted to have a trust that's in lieu of a community benefits agreement where there's no ascertainable person, or if I wanted to have a trust that's for the benefit of the environment, or if I wanted to have a trust for the benefit of some individual's legacy, or if I want to have a trust for for business succession planning through employee ownership, or if I want to have a trust for supply chains that meet certain social and environmental criteria associated with a given business, to incent them to be good corporate citizens. I mean, this will allow us to create those kinds of things. So the mind just expands when you start thinking about how might that be applied in various situations and circumstances. So that's going to be that's not here yet, but I expect it'll be here within the next few months.
So as a community foundation, can I give grants to L3Cs, or do I have to only give them to the parent 501c3?
You can, unless there's some prohibition within your bylaws or your policies, and those, of course, can be changed to accommodate them.
Okay.
There's no legal prohibition any more than any other foundation.
Okay.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, isn't it? That's why
It is. It is.
I'm counting on that.
I don't think Julie and I are going to be out there on a street corner with a sign, hey, I do L3C. We're going to say we need more from Mark. We need to learn from, we need to send them to Mark. We need to, there's just, it just, pulling in that for-profit and creating that is something that a nonprofit brain like mine has to learn to open up a little bit about, right? I mean,
well, you're funny you're saying that, because often the first steps for me in my part of the journey, once I get to understand the organization a little bit, the first substantive stuff is in front of the board, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I want to field whatever questions or concerns they have and address them. And because I want the board to greenlight this sort of an initiative with enthusiasm, and they can't do that if they're in the dark about what it is and what it isn't, and also understand why nonprofits are doing this and how this helps them and therefore would help this organization. So I think and then from there, we often work with, whether it's an executive director or a task force of the board or whatever it is, there's some champion internally. And then we kind of look at core competencies, underutilized assets. Internally, I will be able to ferret out, what kinds of businesses might make sense here, and then bring that back ultimately to the board and give them a green light to kind of prove concept. Because I'm a guy who likes to measure twice before cutting once.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to make sure this thing's going to kind of fly and figure out how can we pilot this relatively inexpensively to just test the market and so on. And is it going to do what we want it to do? Is it in furtherance of our purpose? I just want to make sure there's no mission creep, or we're just pretty careful about doing what we're doing it for the right things for the right reasons. Sometimes we'll find advantages as a nonprofit looks at where it's at, in not mission creep so much as kind of application of mission to present circumstances, which can mean a lot of things, and I'll let you draw your own inference. But we do have the ability with an L3C to say, okay, we're here, we'd like to move a little over here for this reason. And we have the ability to amend the 990 or on the next 990, explain to the IRS we're doing this. And that's fine. You're not locked into the purpose you had on your 1023 X years ago. And the 990, the next 990 is the way to say, we're the place to say, we now have an L3C and this is what we're doing with it and why. And that's fine. And because it is a disclosure item to the IRS, and that's good. And then they're on board. But because sometimes for example, we're working now with a major theater company, and ticket sales are not enough to keep them afloat, although they have a global presence. And it's just universal problem within the theater community. So we're looking at different ways to generate earned revenue. Well, they have a costume shop. They can create costumes for other theaters. They have a set design shop. They can design sets for other theaters and so on. And not even touching intellectual property and how they can leverage their IP in different ways, educationally through other forms of media and so on. So obviously their 990 is, we are a theater company. We sell tickets for audiences who come in and watch our plays. Well, yeah, okay. But there's nothing that says the stuff you're already doing, you can, one way I think about this is, let's look at your programs. What programs might be elevated to become businesses? So they still have the social purpose, but now let's be purposeful about generating revenue from those things and living in the commercial marketplace as to those things where you are actually expanding and leveraging what you're doing anyway, but now generating revenue from it in a meaningful way. And that way it supplements revenue from theater tickets and foundation grants and so on. So, I mean, that's an example where you have to kind of think through, what is your exempt purpose? And, the board is often going to be locked in the past. What our purpose is, what it says, and our articles, our bylaws, and our 990. Well, okay, that's what it was, but what's a strategic plan about other than kind of revisiting those things and thinking through in a new unit of time, how can you optimize your social impact while becoming more sustainable and doing it in a way that is faithful to what you're trying to accomplish and always have been trying to accomplish, often beyond the four corners of the theater building, for example. There are immersive experiences that are being created, all kinds of stuff. So
I like that. That's a great explanation of usage for this. Mm-hmm. Julie, is your mind blown? Are you, yeah?
Yeah, well, I had a couple of questions. He already answered them. So yes, an L3C has to be registered, at least in Illinois, with the Attorney General. And
let me mention something about that. The Illinois L3C has that requirement. Sometimes a client will say, I'm laissez-faire. I'm not looking for government involvement. I don't want to register with any attorney general. Now, when I wrote the law, I purposely built it in because I thought that was going to be very useful in bringing down defenses of donors and foundations who don't know what an L3C is, don't know what a program-related investment is, have always operated exclusively through grants. But if you can tell them, hey, look, it's registered the way any charity is. It's scrutinized and registered, regulated. Okay, I thought that was good. But not every state's L3C has that requirement. So for example, if I had a client that wants to do it without that requirement, I could register in Vermont. They don't have that requirement. So, I mean, there are slight differences among the statutes. So we find the statute, which is going to be most hospitable to the client's needs and objectives and preferences. So yeah, I mean, I think of it as a positive, but that's why they have chocolate and vanilla. Not everybody agrees on everything.
It's amazing. The more and more that I work with nonprofits throughout the country, which states have attorney general requirements. Kentucky does, which surprised me. Nevada doesn't.
And then the other issue is where there are charitable regulators, they're trying to expand their turf. So if the statute doesn't say that the L3C is to be registered, and it is a state that has charitable registration, then the question becomes, well, do we register or not? Well, that's an issue. So we work through that issue. But I'm just a believer that if you're not transparent and you're not accountable, then that raises suspicions in my mind in the first place about whether you should be doing anything along these lines, because it's just kind of asking for trouble.
I think so too. I've always tried to figure out why C6 doesn't have to register in Illinois with the Attorney General. I never understood that part.
It has to do with where the money comes from.
Yeah, even though the Attorney General is another step in the cog, and sometimes it takes longer, and sometimes Attorney Generals are, 2 to 3 months. I mean, it's like an IRS 1023 easy online can be 2 to 3 months, and it's just like, this
It
poor
could be 2 to
nonprofit
3
can't accept.
months. So it could be 2 to 3 months. However, the exemption is effective as of the date of the organization.
It is. It
So,
totally is. But in Illinois, they tell you can't collect a penny in donation until
that's a separate thing. Yeah,
yeah, it's a whole separate
the
thing.
Charitable
So,
Solicitation Act is a different deal. I'm talking about the IRS exemption.
oh, the IRS exemption. Yeah,
Yeah.
that I think they're easier to work with. A lot of people say, well, the IRS isn't easy to work with. I said, I think they pretty much get this.
Well, the IRS is there's going to be a new IRS here, so we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I worry a little bit about that.
That's a separate conversation.
That is a separate conversation. Okay, so the low profit limited liability company, that the name is interesting. Itself, and I think that's where people get confused. They're like, well, then my business can't make any money if it's with a nonprofit. And I said, well, that's not how the terminology here is set up, and you've explained that extremely.
Right. Well, I'm a capitalist. I'm using market-based strategies. I just happen to be a capitalist with a conscience. But but this is, the LLC, they're everywhere. You probably have one.
I do.
So it's an easy amendment to make it an L3C if you wanted to. I mean, I'm not lobbying for you to do that, but I'm just saying it's a simple thing. And then at that point, you're subject to the opportunities and the requirements of the L3C, which you don't have either of today.
Julie. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, earlier he said that L3Cs, at least in Illinois, must have that in their name. So I just pulled up the Illinois Secretary of State business name search and just simply put in L3C and pulled up a giant menu of companies that are either active, voluntarily dissolved, or involuntarily dissolved. So, and Sally and I will tell you, Mark, you probably share the exact same thing. We know so many nonprofits that are so wrapped around the axle about the 501c3 IRS part of it, they totally ignore and are ignorant of the state laws around it. And people say, hey, I filed my 501c3, now what do I do? And you say, well, did you register in your state? And they're like, no, why would I?
I'll tell you one other thing. I will only touch on this. But there is a new sheriff in town, the town being the District of Columbia. And consequently, there are a lot of players who might have set up 501c3s, but instead are setting up social enterprises where there is no IRS involvement. And other than it would be an LLC, you get a taxpayer ID number, you file a tax return. So, I mean, it's same as any business at that point. And the registrations at the local level, and obviously, at least with respect to Illinois, where I am, and we are, and except for Mississippi, I don't know about that. But there is, blue states, Mississippi, I won't speak to Mississippi. I understand. But I'm in Illinois, although I have clients in every state. But Julie and I are Illinois, at least, and you're
Well,
my
corporate's set up in Illinois, and I still have an office in Illinois.
You're Illinois-ish.
I'm Illinois-ish.
But anyway, so that's all blue state, and that avoids all that stuff. And obviously, we're going through a process with each of our C3s, whether or not they have an L3C, in terms of self-protection and defense under current circumstances. And there are a lot of things that we are recommending to nonprofits relating to current challenges.
Oh, do tell.
So, well,
Is that another whole conversation? Because
I'd rather talk about that in a less public environment.
I understand. Okay,
Yeah.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have some great
Because,
insight on that too. Because it's a juggling contest right now.
well, there are things that can be done and are
Yeah.
done. And but there is a lot of fear of retribution, retaliation, donor blowback stuff. And needing to, this is not news.
No. No, there's a lot of afraid nonprofit.
Well, but I guess my point is to disabuse one who is unduly fearful, because there are steps can be taken to mitigate risk. And this is within the category of risk mitigation.
Well, it sure sounds like it. I've got a girlfriend that owns an enterprise company, and it has all the little, businesses underneath it. They're not little, but I mean the businesses underneath it. Then
Yeah.
we just opened up a nonprofit for her
Yeah,
to create a childcare center.
nice.
Is that something that we should look at the L3C to culminate for all of these businesses, or should I just give
Well,
her
I'd need to know,
a
I'd need to
phone
know
number?
more about all of these businesses, but I mean, there are such things. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it sounds like that might be a good ticket for
I
her.
mean, I think of each entity, put C3s to the side,
Yeah,
but any other entity as a legal fiction. It's an alter ego of the entrepreneur. Now, C3 obviously is a fiduciary situation that's different, but where
right.
there is ownership involved, if you have a business entity and you have social enterprises and you have business corporate social responsibility issues, or even if you have a corporate foundation that is controlled by the for-profit entity, you have kind of an empire, and you can kind of mix and match what are the straight lines and dotted lines between and among them to optimize tax efficiency, asset protection, and social impact to the extent that's a goal. But I do this for clients that are not social enterprises too. I represent a lot of for-profit entities. But but yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of, what do you put in what pocket and why, and how does that interact with others? I mentioned an intellectual property holding company. We're doing that for a lot of entities for a lot of reasons, where you keep the assets out of it for asset protection reasons. You could license to internally and externally for profit centers that you might not yourself be capable or interested in pursuing your own, but you want to get a piece of the revenue anyway. You have a complementary player, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit. There are a lot of ways of and then the other thing nonprofits are notorious for, in my experience, they do not appreciate and value their intellectual property. If
No.
it's not in the balance sheet, they don't think about it.
Mm-mm.
And yet, how many of them have methodologies, curricula, know-how, experience, expertise within the talents of their leadership, within the talents of their staff? How can you package that and leverage it and monetize it? How do you think about that? We're looking at a lot of nonprofits today as data companies. Never would have occurred to them. Never would have occurred to them. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways of thinking about that.
That's some really good. We're shaking our heads because we get that part really, really well. We understand.
Well, and it truly is a presentation unto itself geared toward the nonprofit sector.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes they're so busy chasing dollars and putting out fires that the strategic plan is kind of it's there, but it really doesn't get into a holistic approach about what are all the different ways we might be pursuing mission, which, by the way, will make us stronger.
Yeah. Yeah,
One without the
they
other
do.
doesn't get you anywhere.
It's never in there. And that's why I'm one of the people that don't like strategic plans for nonprofits at a simple level, because they don't know what to do with it when it's done. It's like
Often
it's
it's
on
often
there.
it gathers dust.
It just sits and gathers dust. I like
Yeah.
programs at work. I like things to be.
That's why I always force myself, whether the client wants me to or not, to be a significant part of the strategic planning process. I think you need to have the lawyer who has some financial expertise, understands this stuff, to be part of it. Otherwise, you're going to have somebody who has experience in a siloed way, and you can't you have to bridge those silos.
Yeah.
And shame on the consultant who doesn't wrap up a strategic plan with a list of short, medium, and long-term action steps.
Well, that's on the client to actually do, though.
Yeah, I hear you.
You
It's
can have a
very,
list, but the list is not self-actualized. So
how long does this all take, Mark? If somebody
I
were
don't know what it is.
to get this a couple years to get the L3C together?
Oh, no,
Oh,
I've, I have a lot of good traits. Patience isn't one of them. So time is our enemy, and people are suffering. If you talk about nonprofits, these are, marginalized people, disinvested communities. I mean, whatever it is, this is not a leisurely process. I like to get everything done in, 60 days, 90 days if you can, or if not, there needs to be a very good reason.
yeah, Julie and I like that too. We like to get things moving so that they can become functional. I mean, it's,
And
quick,
once they hear what it is, they're chomping at the bit to get it done.
right,
They didn't know it was there.
right, right. And the paperwork doesn't seem to be any more difficult than any other setup in Illinois anyway, when it comes to
Well,
this.
what I encourage clients to think about is to look at what they have as a system and apply design thinking to that system. That's what the process is.
Mhm. Hmm, I like it a lot. Julie?
Sally and I like it because we both are very creative thinkers and
Oh, I know.
outside the box and what if we did something differently type of thing. So you are preaching to the choir, but we're still fuzzy on the details, which is why you're here.
Thank you.
Well, we have to learn from Mark. I mean, and I told him at the beginning of this before we even got started. I said, "Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to become the expert in this. I'm going to send him over to you." It's
Well,
just
you may become the expert against your will.
no, that'll be Julie. I need to golf more. I need
Well,
golfing, and
we haven't ruled out a golf course as the venue where these decisions are entertained and made.
I like that.
All
You
things
know,
are
we could set up a booth like Lucy when the doctor was in.
Yeah, yeah,
right.
We could set that out on the eighth tee or something like that and conduct business hours.
yeah. Well, I'll be waving at you as I go by, trying to
All
find
things,
my
all
ball,
things
like
are possible.
always. Because this is just so, it makes so much sense on the surface. When I started reading about it, the first time I talked to Mark, I mean, I called Julie and I'm like, oh my God, where's this man been my whole life? And
All the girls say that.
well, I've heard that. I absolutely
I
have
just
heard
won't mention it to my wife, but it's okay.
Oh, she knows. Wives
Right.
know, Mark.
Smart wives know, right? And we appreciate that, right?
Right.
It's like, oh, you love my husband, great, because I do too. So we'll have a love thing going. And I like the fact that you stated the 5% foundations must be given yearly,
Yes, that's the law.
and
That's 5%. That's the minimum.
that's not a lot. I
That's
guess it
the
depends on.
criticism. In difficult times,
Could be,
the
could be.
the more enlightened foundations are stepping up and doing more.
Yeah.
No prohibition to just doing more. As you know, some foundations think it's their business to go out of business and distribute their money.
Yeah.
Julie's like, yeah, because she comes from the whole foundation side of things.
There is that school of thought as well, but the 5% is the minimum.
Okay, 5%.
Well, there are plenty of nonprofits who need to put themselves out of business as well. We need no
There-
more hunger and no more violence.
Well, and there are too many nonprofits that are redundant, that are doing what other nonprofits are doing better and less expensively and more impactfully. So that I'm a kind of a fan of the argument that we ought to find ways for nonprofits to merge. We do a lot of that work, or dissolve, or do some other stuff. So because they're taking stuff away from nonprofits that can get the job done more effectively, more impactfully. That's
So
a
I am I'm proud to report that on some of these private Facebook groups, somebody will come on and go, "Hi, I'm going to start a new nonprofit. Help me." And 99% of the time, a handful of people come on and go, "Well, did you research the ones locally? Did
Right.
you approach them about doing the fundraising to increase the amount of services they're doing or to start a new line of services
Right.
instead of you creating your own?
Exactly.
Have you looked into partnering?" So
That's too
we have a
often.
lot of enlightened peers who
Yeah,
understand that
too
very
often
well.
that's just about ego. And if you have if you have the ego, even if you have the passion, doesn't mean you have the skills or what it takes to pull this off. It's, as everybody knows, it's really hard. And many prospective clients who come in to talk about setting up a nonprofit, I will gently disabuse them of that notion.
That's a good way to put that because Julie and I do that all the time.
Yep,
If I get a
absolutely.
call and I'm like, wait, let me. They'll email me and I'll say, well, let me research a little bit, and and I start researching. I'm like, well, there's 5 other places
Uh-huh.
within 30 miles of you.
Right.
Maybe we need to, do a whole umbrella here. Maybe we need to merge you all together and make one big one. And well, I don't like who's running that, and that's when I'm like.
Ego.
That's why you want to do it. It has nothing to do with, the dogs and cats are going to be helping. It's all about you don't like that person, you think you can do better. And many times I back out of assisting because I give them options of merge and they don't like it.
Well, by the way, most of those will fail anyway,
Yeah, they will.
and they may not even launch.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't want them to take those donor dollars with them.
No, but yeah, you're
You
right.
know,
You have to educate them, whether they listen or not. That's on them. I mean,
Yeah.
if you
So,
can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all,
yeah.
right?
I don't know if I can't say that for myself because I'm a lawyer.
Well, we're not lawyers and we're going to say it.
Well, then you can just be nice. I
We'll
don't know
be
if I can
nice and
always be.
go.
I can't always be nice, but sometimes I can be kind. So
That's
that's my metric.
Yep, that's a good way of phrasing it. Yep.
Do you have any other questions for Mark other than 100,000, but we don't want to take up any more time? I mean, we obviously need to get him back another time because, right? I mean, you and I are speechless. That never
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. Well, my brain was going down. So I teach planned giving. I'm on
Right,
the board of Chicago Council on Planned Giving.
right.
And a lot of little nonprofits don't understand the tasks within planned giving that they can do without being a licensed attorney or accountant or wealth manager. And I don't know if that may be a topic for another day. Um, Helping nonprofits understand their donor relations activities and when they need an attorney and when they don't.
Well,
So,
I'll add a factoid to what you just said, which I would suggest you add to the list, and that is having and understanding a gift policy. We have clients also in California, as it turns out. They're in carbon recapture, and they were offered as a gift a huge farm, thousands and thousands of acres. So the question arose by me, do you guys have the wherewithal to run, manage, bear the risk of a huge farm? And so then at that point, the wheels started turning and there are ways we're going to be doing it. We're actually using a 501c2. Have you ever used that?
nope.
501c2 is a title holding organization, which itself
Oh,
is tax exempt for asset protection purposes. If a nonprofit has real estate, it can put it in a C2. And that way, if there is a liability or claim associated with the real estate, it doesn't affect the nonprofit and vice versa. So it's a very cute asset protection vehicle. It also is very helpful for financing because the C2 can go out and get a loan on its own without the nonprofit guaranteeing it. It's predicated on the value of the real estate. So there, but anyway, so I mean, I was just going back to a gift policy where people understand gifts can sometimes have explicit or implicit strings attached. And you need to understand, what you're bargaining for, because the human nature is to say, well, anything they're going to give me, yeah, if I can get a dozen used cars, I'd love to go get those. Well, okay, would you really? Or you know what I mean? It's sometimes people trying to unload stuff and they think they're getting and they're doing it for a charitable deduction, and maybe there's some social points to it, but mostly it's deduction. And yet, the recipient nonprofit is ill-equipped to deal with it once they get it. And there needs to be some, and they need to also pass resolutions when they have, exotica as assets that they're accepting. Doesn't apply when you're getting publicly traded stock or cash or, but when you get into other stuff, that may have liabilities attached to it, may have employees attached to it, may have claims associated with it, might have litigation that's still haunting it one way or another. I mean, people don't necessarily look at that stuff. They just think, okay, anything you want to give us, we'd rather have than not have. That isn't necessarily in the best interest of the nonprofit.
Yeah, material restrictions. Sally and I have a colleague who the donor came to his best friend who was on the nonprofit board and pressured our friend, the gift officer, into accepting funeral plots, burial plots. It took her 18 months to liquidate those, and it netted like $7,000. Well, she spent 18 months of her time and netted only $7,000. And the sad part was that other people within that organization just looked at her and went, yes, so?
Right.
So, yes, gift acceptance policy needs to, hopefully it gives you the strength to say no.
Well, it creates a policy. So if you have a policy, you have a procedure. If you have a procedure, it isn't one person shouting in the wilderness.
Right.
Oh, Julie and I are big on policy and procedure. Believe me, I'm all about the policy. I'm Mrs. Preachy about all the policies, and
well,
we've never needed those before.
Well, you needed them. You may just not have had them.
Exactly. And now more than ever, you need them, and you need them to be in place, and the board needs to understand them, and you need to follow those procedures. And that's why I don't like putting policy in bylaws.
I agree.
Because, you can only update those bylaws once a year by law, and policy can be updated whenever.
You can update bylaws whenever you want to, unless there's some reason you can't. I mean, I don't know what it would be. The other thing in that category are conflicts of interest statements. And that's something that boards and officers have a very difficult time understanding.
Yes.
And how you, even as to compensation, which is where it comes up most often, in my experience, is if you have somebody on the board that you're giving a salary to, who happens to be an officer, how you have to have family members who may be on the board also recuse themselves. And then you have to make sure you have a quorum. So you have to have a big enough board to land with a quorum as you look at any potentially conflicted directors as to comp or other transactions, if there's real estate that they're using or, whatever it may be. So, I mean, it just, you get into this stuff where people don't necessarily understand. They think once it's set up, it's set up. And that's the start. That's not the end.
Well, and I teach, you have to adopt all policies during time of calm, because you don't want that conflict to come up and the board meeting get contentious and you can't resolve it right then and there because you don't have a conflict of interest policy. So then they're scrambling trying to get one ready for the next board meeting so that they can adopt it, so that they can then act on this other action that
and then it looks
brought
like
the conflict to light.
And then it looks like the policy is being drafted to target the controversial situation, whereas actually, I think you're exactly right. The policy has to be drafted and agreed when nobody sees any controversy.
Right.
It's just, this is just, this is in the category of best practices. That's all it is.
And the good news is there are enough scary stories out there that
Yeah, that's
from
good
other
news.
parts of the country that you can use as an example
Yeah.
of why your policy needs to be created or edited or the phrasing it needs to be in. And, just we had a sports mom take off with $10,000 here locally in the past couple of years, because they didn't have the policies in place
They didn't have a
about cash
policy against, they
handling
didn't
and
have a
all that kind
policy
of stuff.
against theft.
But
Some nonprofits argue with me that they don't need any. And
right,
I don't like to help them without those policies in place. I said you're always going to be behind the ball. Always. You're always going to be kicking it down the road instead of saying, oh, wait, we have a policy on that. And we have a policy manual on that. I mean, and it's easy then. And they can be reviewed and they should be reviewed. But
Right.
before that, new board of director takes the seat for the first time,
Yeah.
they need that orientation. They need to sign those
Well,
policies.
that's part of the onboarding.
It is absolutely part of it. And I don't care if they say, well, I've been sitting on boards for years. I said, well, this board's different. It's not the same board that you were on. And I don't know what you did on that board. I can't tell the rest of the board, oh yeah, she's good to go because she sat on that board. And so there's so many. I think that's why there's people like the three of us that are in this world. I feel compelled to keep working with nonprofits. Just some I want to hug, some I want to shake, and say stop it, stop it, stop it. It's it's not only incorrect, it's stupid. What I'm looking at is like doesn't make sense to me. So there's Mark. Will you come back another time?
I would love to. I don't know if I know any more. I think I've told
Yes,
you.
you do. Oh my
I
gosh.
gave you 100% brain dump, so I'm not sure there's anything left.
Well, I love your brain dump, and I love the fact that you were able to get that out there and explain it in a way that even I understood this, which is um unbelievable. And
I should mention to you, when will this appear?
I'm going to be going live with it later today or
Okay,
tomorrow.
let me mention for those who are in the Chicago area,
Yes.
there is an event that will be taking place next week, April 4th at UIC. No charge, uh, breakfast included, 8 in the morning till noon. And it's going to be a social enterprise symposium
Ooh.
co-hosted by Social Enterprise Chicago, which is a nonprofit that I chair, and the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation that I alluded to earlier, and a lot of good people, good opportunities for networking. I will also be making a small presentation about the L3C there during that event. So if anyone's interested, we only ask that you register for it. Again, there's no charge. But if you go to my Facebook page or LinkedIn, you'll find an announcement about it. And oh, thank you for that.
Is there a link there too? Do you have that? Julie, is that the link? I'll
There
make
I
is
sure.
just posted it for socialenterprisechicago.com.
there is on that website. There's also a link to that event if you can spot it.
Okay, I'll make
And
sure.
also
Yeah.
on my social media, you'll have it. So if you're interested in this topic, any of your listeners or both of you are around, or either of you, we'd love to have you. And again, it's at UIC, and we're going to have the Congressman Garcia is going to be speaking. Teresa Cordova, who's head of the Great Cities Institute at the university, will be speaking. Uh, Commissioner Anaya of Cook County Board will be speaking. The Chief Procurement Officer for the county will be there speaking. The head of the Cook County Land Bank will be speaking. There will be two members of the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation who also have their own organizations will be speaking. Walter Mendenhall, who runs a very successful social enterprise in Chicago, happens to be a client of mine. You may know the name because he was an NFL player once upon a time. He has an organization called Male Mogul Initiative that has two L3C subsidiaries. It's a mentoring organization, but much more.
Nice.
And an attorney in my firm and I will be talking about L3Cs and benefit corporations. And there will be networking opportunities as well, and free breakfast. So how can you beat that?
Well,
So anyway, I just wanted to mention that for anyone who might be interested in
oh, I'm
attending.
glad you did. I will put a link to that in all the social medias as well, for them to email or to get registered for that. That sounds pretty
Perfect.
incredible. Thank you for bringing that up too.
Okay, guys. Well, I very much enjoyed my time together with you, and thank you so much for the
Thank you, Mark.
the
Thank you so
conversation
much,
and for
Julie.
your leadership, both of you.
Well, we're just little cogs in the wheel of nonprofit life, and people like you that write this kind of big legislation and then explain it the way that you have is a treat for us. So I know Julie and I were both very excited about today, and now that you said you're going to come back another time, well, we're definitely going to have you back. So
You guys are great.
Mark,
Thank you so much. It would be an
until
honor.
then, thank you so much.
Thanks to both of you.